Good afternoon to our Lunch and Learn, and we are here today to talk about spring seed planting. So I will introduce our speaker for today. Our speaker today is Susan Gingrich from the Master Gardener Association of the Central Rappahannock area. Susan, it's really nice to have you with us. We are looking forward to hearing about spring seed starting, since this is a time when a lot of people are starting their seeds either indoors or thinking about starting them outdoors soon. So please tell us all you know about spring seed starting.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's good to be here. And after that major snowstorm we had and the freezing temperatures, I think everybody has a little bit of spring fever. So we are going to talk about two different methods of seed starting and some basic principles. And then I'll just briefly mention hardening off and transplanting, since those are difficult for some people, but it's actually pretty easy. So if you want to go to the next slide. So to start off, we're going to talk about 5 factors that affect germination. And if you can have these 5 factors in place, you really can use any method as long as these factors are considered and there. So we'll talk about each one of those briefly. The first one is seed quality. Doesn't matter if you have all the other things in place. If you've got seed that is a poor quality and isn't what you want, then it's not going to grow. The first part of that is you need to make sure that the seed is pure, which means it's true to type. So you know that it has not had cross-pollination with something else, and you're going to get a surprise, or maybe that's what you want, then it's okay. But most people want to know what they're going to get. And so you need to make sure your seed is true to type. The second thing you need to make sure of is that it's viable. That generally has to do with storage. So viable means that it is alive and it will germinate. Believe it or not, seeds are alive, and they should be stored in a cool, dry place. Also, actually that goes to the next one. So you can always experiment. These are things that we're mentioning that are just factors to consider. But if you're willing to experiment, just know that these might affect the germination rate or the percentage of germination. Obviously, it's better to have seeds that are clean and free of debris and other things. Sometimes it's difficult to tell which is the seed and which is the debris if they haven't been cleaned well. And then the last thing there about seed quality is they need to be fresh. So seeds are generally harvested in the end of summer or fall. I mean, it depends on the life cycle of 1 year, and then they will be packaged and sold for the next year for growing. So when you look at the back of a seed package, it will be stamped somewhere on there and say packaged for, so for this year, it would say packaged for 2026. That means they were grown and harvested last year. Seeds will usually last for 2 to 3 years. And then depending on storage, depending on the seed and other factors, the germination rate will start dropping after that. So again, you can try seeds that are older. You can experiment. Just know that they may not do exactly what you want them to do. The second factor is water. So the seed, the growing process is actually triggered by the moisture, and a seed needs adequate continuous moisture, meaning adequate, it's not too much and you're not drowning the seed. It's not too dry. It has to have just the right amount, and it needs to be continuous at that right amount. Once germination has begun, if it dries out or if it drowns, but generally the problem is that it dries out at any time during that germination process. And that's usually anywhere from 2 or 3 days to 2 or 3 weeks, depending on the seed. If it dries out at any time, then it will cause the death of the embryo, the little baby plant that's in that seed. So it's a really critical factor that you have. The medium is moist, but it's not too dry. It's not too wet and drowning the seed. And the reason you don't want it too wet is the third factor here is oxygen. So viable seeds actively respire, meaning they breathe. They have to exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide, and they're doing that all the time. But once you've triggered that germination process with the moisture, that respiration, that breathing is going to increase, and they need more and more oxygen as they are going through that process and turning into a little plant. So you need to make sure that the medium, whatever that, meaning the soil, the seed starting mix, whatever you're planting those seeds in, it needs to drain well so that the oxygen is there. So in a regular garden, if you've got pretty decent soil, you're going to have little pockets of air. Same if you use seed starting mix or potting soil, whatever, that generally drains well. If you use a clay garden soil to start your seeds in, that probably is going to hold the water too much for that seed to get started and sprout. The fourth factor is light. So light either stimulates or inhibits germination. And the only way you're going to know whether your seeds need light is to look on the packet or in the catalog that you ordered them from, or you can look it up online. But generally on a packet, it will say if it needs light. If it does not say anything, generally it means that you plant it deep, especially if it tells you how deep to plant it. If light is required to trigger that germination and keep it going, then it will tell you to sow it on top. If you want to make really sure that you know what you're doing is right, you can always Google your type of seed and say, do they need light? But you can usually tell, because on the package it will either say, sow on top of the soil and lightly press. You're lightly pressing it into the soil so that it has contact with that moisture in the soil, but it needs to be exposed to the light in order to germinate. And if it needs darkness, then it will tell you to sow it, what depth to sow the seed at. But in general, the rule of thumb is 2 to 3 times the seed's diameter or thickness is how deep you should plant that seed. The last factor is temperature. So most seeds have a range between 65 and 75 degrees, where all seeds have an optimal temperature. But if you're planting a bunch of different seeds like I do at the same time, then that range is just a good place to be. Having the temperature within that favorable range will affect not only how many seeds germinate, but how quickly they will germinate. And if that temperature fluctuates and it gets cool and then warmer and cool and warmer, your seeds may germinate, but then a lot of times you have a problem with what's called damping off, where they look beautiful one day and you look at them, in an hour or the next day, and they're all like somebody's snapped them off and they're leaning over. They're really skinny right above the soil, and that's called damping off. And that is generally caused by this fluctuation in temperatures. So you can maintain temperatures with a plant heating mat that actually they've come down in price. So those are good to have if you have had that problem in the past. Want to go to the next slide, please? Okay, so we're going to talk about the 2 methods I said. The first one we're going to talk about is winter sowing. It's very, very popular right now. And my philosophy overall is you need to experiment and find out what works with you. So I love winter sowing for seeds that need to be cold stratified. There are some seeds that will not break dormancy. They will not germinate until they've had a certain number of days of temperatures. Usually it's below 45, I think 42, something like that. They have to have, usually it's 30, anywhere from 30 to 90 days of that. And that's called cold stratification. It will usually tell you that on the package if it needs it. Native plant seeds almost always need cold stratification. And the reason I love winter sowing for this is because you can do it in December or January, after it gets, so we have the first freeze, you can plant those seeds and then kind of forget about them until it's spring. But otherwise, you get to put them in your fridge. If you hear about cold stratification, they'll say that you should just, put them in moist soil or in a moist paper towel or something in a bag in your fridge. The problem with that is I just don't have room in my fridge for as many seeds as I want. So winter sowing is really good for those seeds, but it will also work on seeds that do not need to be cold stratified. You can see the advantages and disadvantages there. I just really want to go over the steps. I would say the biggest advantage first, though, is that last one. If you do winter sowing, your plants are acclimated to the weather because they're outside and they do not need to be hardened off. So that is, to me, the biggest plus. You also don't need the grow lights. If you're doing them indoors, generally you do, unless you have a south window. So what you'll need is you'll collect jugs, milk jugs. They can be anything really that's plastic that you can cut. You want them to have the little lid at the top. You don't want the lid, actually, you leave the lid off, but you want it to come closer so that it kind of creates that greenhouse effect. You wash it, you throw away the cap, and then you need to put holes. Remember, we talked about drainage. It needs to drain so that the oxygen is there and the seed can breathe. And so you'll put 5 to 6 holes in the bottom of the jug. You can also put a few on the side if you want, down low. It's kind of up to you. And if you do it, you'll kind of come to something that you like. And milk jugs, usually I think you can use the hot glue gun to melt the holes, but some of the harder clear plastic that like juice and things come in often is the glue gun does not work well, and so you need to use a drill to drill those holes. The purpose is just for draining, so as long as you can break that and the water can drain out, the moisture can drain out, then you'll be good. Then you cut the jug in half, but not like totally off. It's hooked at the handle. And that's so that you can move it around and all, but also it is at the right level. So you need to be able to pack 3 to 4 inches of soil in the bottom. 4 inches is generally what's recommended. And the biggest key here is that soil should be wet. And what's meant by wet is that it's moist, it's damp. Think of a sponge. You should be able to grab that soil, squeeze a bunch in your hand, it'll hold together. But when you squeeze, only a drop or maybe 2 will come out of water. If more than that comes out, then you've got way too much water and you need to squeeze it all out and get rid of it until there's, just a drop. Otherwise, you're going to drown your seeds. But it is important to moisten that soil first. When you first moisten potting soil or the seed starting mix, it kind of sheds the water and you kind of have to mix it in. So I always do that like in a separate little bucket before I actually put the soil into the bottom of the jug. Then you plant your seeds according to the packet instructions, however deep it says. Some people, they're really tiny, just sprinkle it all. Just be aware that you're going to have probably good germination and every seed could sprout. And so if you just fill that top by the time you come to the bottom there and you have your plants there, the roots are going to be so intertwined. You're going to be cutting those roots and tearing it apart. And for some things that works well. Some plants are harder than others, but some seeds do better spaced out a little bit. So consider that. The next step is to tape the jug back together. Use duct tape. You don't want that cold winter weather to be able to get in. You also don't want animals to be able to get into your seeds and dig them up. So you tape it back together, and then you label. Now, actually, I would suggest before you tape it together, you stick a label in the container. Whatever little plant label you use, just stick something in there, because the Sharpie pen does not last. When it is out in the weather and in the sun, that Sharpie is going to fade. So either use a paint pen or a grease, I think it's called a grease pencil or grease pen. Those will last, the Sharpie will not. But if you have it labeled inside as well, you'll be okay and know what you had. Then you set it in a sunny spot. You remember that cap is off. The snow, the rain get in, they keep it moist. And you've got your holes so that it drains and doesn't flood it. The jug just makes it a little greenhouse. You should see condensation in there that lets you know that there is moisture in there. If you have a really dry spell, you will need to actually water it a little, spray it with a spray bottle. You need to be able to see that condensation on the sides. That's that continuous moisture. If you don't, you need to add some water, because it should not dry out. You should have that little bit of condensation on there. And then once the seeds sprout, it says open the jug in spring. Well, depending on the temperatures, usually about 50 degrees, you can open that all the way up and the plants will do better. What I've heard from some people is they don't open it up. They leave it until it's time to plant, and the plants get kind of leggy. They'll grow up and through the hole, and they don't look as healthy. So once they have sprouted, you want to be able to open that up, but you can also then close it back up. If a cold snap comes, if there's a late frost, you can, just put the top back over, cover it with a blanket if you need to, but you can go back and forth that way. So it's super easy. There are some issues, but you kind of have those issues anyway. So I don't know about the disadvantages too much, other than the biggest complaints I've heard are just that the roots are so matted together or they get leggy and aren't as healthy. But like I said, for cold stratification seeds that need that, it is really a great method to use. Okay, let's go to the next one. So this is the one that I use for all the other seeds. Now, I know other people have used the winter sowing method for everything that they do, vegetables and flowers. I like to have a little more control. So again, it's kind of a personal preference. One of the advantages is you can create more of an optimal germination environment. I like to see that. I like to watch them. I like to talk to my plants and my little seedlings and watch the whole process. So I don't just want to plant them and then forget them. But, we all have our preferences. So either one is perfectly fine. It is more work. But if you have a good south-facing window, some of the best tomatoes that I've ever grown from seed were when I lived in New Mexico and had a south-facing window, and they were beautiful. I didn't need a heat mat. I didn't need grow lights. I could just stick them in that window. I do not have that here. In fact, I have no south-facing windows in my house. And so I have a grow light, which can just be a shop light with a fluorescent tube. It does not need to be anything fancy. It doesn't need to say grow light. If you've got the white fluorescent tube and put it in a shop light, that's probably your most cost-effective grow light. And you can raise that shock light. You're going to need to raise it throughout the process. But what you do is you have these little seed starting kits, I think is what they're called, but they have like a flat tray. Then they have a tray that's full of the little cells, the little sections that you see there. And then there is a plastic dome lid that goes on top, which is what creates the greenhouse effect. And so just like with the winter sowing, you're going to moisten your soil first. Make sure it is moist before you put it into those cells, and then you plant your seeds. I usually put 2 seeds per cell just because of germination factors. I want to make sure I have a certain number of plants. I never have problems getting rid of excess plants, but if I don't plant enough and the germination rate isn't great, then I want to make sure I have at least 2 per cell, just for that reason. And then once you get the seeds in, you put the dome on and you put it under your grow lights on your heat mat, or you put it in your south-facing window. So the heat mat will keep those temperatures consistently in that growing range of 65 to 75. You will start to see the germination, or sorry, not the germination, the condensation, like is in that third picture there on the right. And that condensation, again, is like the condensation you want to see in the jug. You want to see that, you know, that there's moisture there. You do not need to add water as long as you see that condensation. If you start to see that it's drying out, the condensation is less, then you always water from the bottom. And so you'll put that cell tray in just the flat plain tray, and you put the water into that flat tray, and let the water soak up from the bottom into your little cells. You want to make sure, I should have mentioned that, Aldi's has really great little kits. You get 3 of them for $5, and they have like 30 to 40 cells in each of those little kits. But they don't have drain holes in the bottom. So just like we put holes in the bottom of the jug, make sure that when you buy your kit, make sure there are drain holes in the bottom of each cell. If not, again, you can use a glue gun. You can, just use a hot nail or something and make those little holes so that it can drain. Once the seedlings have sprouted, you remove that dome. One of the disadvantages to this method is you're inside, you're in a controlled environment. And so if you leave that on, once things have sprouted, there is a problem with mold. There's too much moisture. If you don't have the heat mat, you can also have the damping off. The damping off can also come just from that excess moisture. So make sure you remove that dome. Once most of the seeds have sprouted, you don't have to wait till every single one does, but when most of them have sprouted, you remove that. Then the little sprouts look like the very bottom. When the first true leaves appear, so those first leaves are actually just to start the, it just went out of whatever the process is for the seeds to make photosynthesis, where the seed is making its food. Those are not the true leaves. The true leaves will come next. And I usually transplant into another set of cells because, like I said, I've had at least 2 seeds in a cell, and I want individual plants. And the best time to transplant them is once you see those first true leaves. The shock is almost non-existent at that stage, and you can get them in their own little place to grow. And so that's when I do it. You do not have to do that. You can let them continue to grow, just like in the jug. But that at the point when you see those first true leaves, whether you transplant them or not, you begin to fertilize. I know a lot of people with the winter sowing just go ahead and use a potting soil that has fertilizer in it. It's up to you. Sometimes when you're using that, there can be more disease or issues, sometimes not. So again, it's use what you have. But when you start to fertilize those little tiny plants, you want to do it like very weak fertilization. So I use fish emulsion. Does not smell great in the house, but I really like it, and I have it down the basement where nobody is. So I use like a teaspoon to a quart. So it's a really mild fertilization. You can use Miracle Grow. Just don't follow the directions. Make it really weak at first until you see those plants are really growing, and then as they grow, you can work up to the regular strength. And I try to fertilize about every other watering. So once those seeds come up and have sprouted, without that dome on, they're going to dry out more. They're still on the mat. Like I said, I go and talk to my plants every day and check on them and see how they're growing, but it doesn't take long. It's just a, hey, how are you? But I can see if it looks dry on top, I need to water. And I would say it's usually every 3 to 4 days in the beginning as they get bigger. And sometimes actually I can go a week. Like I just look to see, is the top dry? But you can kind of poke your finger down in there and see if there's still some moisture. Again, you still want that continuous adequate moisture, not too wet. You always water from the bottom. As the plants get bigger and the roots are bigger, they're going to soak up that water more, and you actually have to start watering them more frequently. But usually by that time, it's about time to put them outside. One of the things you can do while they're growing, though, to simulate them being outside is some people will use just a gentle fan to blow on those plants like a breeze. Or you can just take your hand and just kind of gently go like this, rubbing across the tops of the plants back and forth, just, a couple times every day. That just helps them to get used to breezes. It will create stronger stems. Those are things you can do to kind of start that hardening off process a little bit early while they're still inside. If you do them inside, you don't have a south-facing window and you have a grow light, make sure that you have those grow lights about 1 inch above the plant for 16 hours a day. It takes that much to try to be like the sun. And so I have them on a little timer. It goes on and off. And that 1 inch is critical. If you have the grow light too far above your plants, those plants will get leggy. And leggy means they're just skinny, tall. They grow really fast and are tall, but they look too skinny and they're kind of weak. And that's because they're trying to reach that sun. They need more light is what that's a sign of. And so if you put that grow light just an inch above, and as the plant grows, I have a shop light and it's got these little chains, and I just move those the chain up so that it goes up along with the growth of the plants. And that will keep your plants from being leggy, and they should grow really well. Next one. Okay, so hardening off, you just need to, I'm not going to go through all of these, but it's a 1 week to 2 week process. Probably closer to 2 weeks. And you don't start that until temperatures are around 50 degrees. I taught this class just recently, and people that were there said hardening off was the hardest part for them. And they realized they were rushing it. You get so excited, your plants are beautiful, but if you just go put them out in the garden, because they've been inside, they are not ready, and they will get sunburnt. They will look really bad for a long time if they survive. So hardening off just means you're getting them used to the temperature fluctuations, the wind, the sun, and generally less water because they're out in the garden. And so over that period, you start in a shady protected area, you put them out just for 1 hour. the first day or so. And then every day then you take them back in and put them back where they were. Next time, maybe 2 hours, then 3 hours, and it's in the shade as you go through. Then eventually it's the direct morning sun that they're going to get when you first put them out. Then eventually you'll get them so that they're out in the afternoon sun as well. What's happening to the plant, the reason it has to be done slowly is because the plant is thickening its cell walls. It's also thickening the waxy layer that's on top of the leaves that help to keep moisture in and protect it from sunburn. So they don't do that when they're growing inside because they're in a protected environment and they don't have those harsh conditions. You can help with the wind to thicken the stems, but again, it's also they're feeling that breeze, and you should see that. If you make that take 10 days to 2 weeks, you're not going to have an issue. It's so tempting, and sometimes even I will still put them out sooner because I'm just in a hurry, and then I'll end up with some sunburn, which looks like brown dead leaves or spots on it, and it really sets them back. So it's critical. It's not hard. It just means that you have to do it slowly. Eventually they stay overnight. You water a little bit less just to have them toughen up a little bit. And then, of course, during that hardening off period, you'd bring them inside if there's a huge snowstorm or hailstorm or something like that, so that they're not out there. It won't set them back if you do that. And you just have to do it for a day or so. You don't have to start over once you do that. And then the next slide is transplanting. That's pretty easy. Dig the hole deeper than what it is in the cell. I would recommend that you break up the roots just a little bit if they're at all matted together, or you've got a kind of root mound in that cell. Break them up because that little bit of stress will actually help the plant send out more roots rather than hurt it. If you've got good, healthy seedlings, that's not going to hurt them. I usually water the plant before I take it out of the cell, and then I put water in the hole. Make sure once you cover that up, you generously water once they're transplanted, and apply mulch. Always apply mulch. Mulch will do all kinds of things. Importantly, at the beginning, it will keep the soil temperature moderate so that it doesn't have those fluctuations. And then it also holds in the moisture as that plant is getting used to being out in the garden. And so I think that's it. The next slide, I think, is just the references. You can show that for a little bit if anybody, I don't know if they can click on it, but you can see if you wanted to study more. Happy gardening and good luck.
Susan, Thank you so much. That was great information. I know I learned a lot, and I hope everyone else did too. Thank you for joining us for this Lunch and Learn. If you need to contact the Master Gardeners, you can go to their website. Susan, do you want to say what that is?
That is MGACRA.org. So it stands for MAGRA, Master Gardener Association of the Central Rappahannock Area. It's a mouthful. MGACRA.org, or you can go to, or you can call the extension office. Just Google Stafford Extension Office, and they can answer questions as well.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
Everyone have a great day.